Um, so the reason I'm interested in games, for one reason, is just the fact that we talked about this as we went around the room, sort of the pervasiveness of gameplay itself, and kids having access to technologies. One thing I want to be cautious of, I do still, I still pay attention to what's called the digital divide. That there are certainly certain gaps in terms of who has what, and I do appreciate that. I do think that we should be perhaps more broad in how we define the digital objects or access, because there are a lot of, if you're talking about digital as far as maybe a desktop computer, that's one thing, but if you're looking at different devices like a phone or an iPod or a game console, I'm cautiously optimistic that the divide is less, or the gap is decreasing. Now we see younger and younger populations, more diverse populations having access to devices that can play games. And again, with the iPod Touch really being promoted as a gaming device, and with the Nintendo DS, just more informally and anecdotally, I can see those almost everywhere I go in public spaces. And a range of groups will have either SES groups or ethnic groups will have these devices. So this report by the Pew Internet Trust, just released last year, talks about 50% of teens saying they just played a game yesterday, 86% saying they played on the Xbox or PlayStation or Wii. These large numbers of playing different titles, going down to the PlayStation Portable, the DS, or the Game Boy. 48% use a cell phone or handheld organizer to play games. So, again, I'm still saying that, still being cautious about saying that everyone has these devices, but increasingly we see access to them. So when we're talking about the digital divide, I think, again, we should be more precise as far as what we're focusing on. If it's, again, more high-end computing devices, that might be the case, but we're looking for access to mobile technologies like game consoles or portable media devices, the gap is much smaller. So what, this term projective identities is a term that G.A.M.E.R uses. And basically what he's trying to say is that we, we're sort of our interaction with these virtual spaces, we're becoming more fluid with them. We can, we enter into these worlds and it becomes part of our lives, and particularly so like in Second Life, or these immersive worlds, that we take on an identity in these worlds, but we can also pull out of them. And really, in education, we talk about transfer, and that's really, I would say, the elephant in the room for us in terms of education. Really the question that I think if you pressed me for an answer, I couldn't give you a definitive one in terms of what do we learn in games? And what do we learn in games that's meaningful outside of the game? I think that if you, I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Roxanne.
Roxanne, she may have, was it Hercules you played?
Yes.
Okay, so she may have learned how to maybe have Hercules succeed in the game and learn how to control the game, but the question is, what she learned in that game, is it meaningful outside of her life? Now, for most of us, when we play games, it is for leisure, or for entertainment, or for escapist type purpose, right? We're just trying to forget our troubles, or release some pressure, or do some exercise, and it's not supposed to have meaning beyond that. But in education, we're asking the question, are meaningful things that are happening in games, are they applying outside the game? Because really we're being held to the standard, if you're going to play a game title, it has to have an impact on something outside, preferably some sort of standardized evaluation metric. And that's the challenge that we're facing within the middle school classroom, is we have to spend a tremendous amount of effort to find supports and activities and assessments around gameplay so that we can legitimate what we're doing, but also show stakeholders that yes, gameplay actually has a measurable positive effect on their performance on some sort of evaluation metric. And that, to be honest with you, that's the hard part that I've become, and sometimes I get a little bit skeptical about whether this will really be achievable, because there's been a lot of effort put into this, but still there's not a lot of widely available empirical data to show that gameplay has these type of effects. So again, this notion that gameplay or world building are more than just for leisure or entertainment purposes. That's what the point we're trying to get here. In terms of semiotic domains, and this is G talking about sort of us moving from what might be called a cognitive perspective, where we are more than just symbol processing units. So we do use a metaphor that the brain is like a computer. We have inputs, processes, and outputs, and that it's a symbol manipulation device. But we're trying to get beyond that to say that we're actually interpretive devices, and we imbue meaning in our worlds, and that's where people are seeing gameplay as having an interesting implication here. And so G.A.M.E.R's trying to promote that he talks about a semiosis, which is making meaningful sense of your world, and not just symbol manipulation, but having you not only can manipulate the symbols, but you know when to use those symbols and where to use them. You become a participant in what he calls a domain, but other terms might be or social practices. Other people talk about affordance networks, that we plug into a particular network that allows us to do more than perhaps we could do as an individual. Talk about affinity groups, particularly around game titles. So if you have, say Lord of the Ring players, you might have a group of folks who play it, and you can rely on them for either advice or suggestions or feedback. Mimi Ito, who was an ethnographer at UC Berkeley, studies teens and media, and she talks about interest-driven networks where, we do use, we hear a lot of anecdotal and evidence of, teens using mobile phones and devices, for chatting and texting and keeping in contact. But there's also sort of the next phase when people use devices to become experts. So, one story she uses is someone who was doing, they were watching Japanese anime, which is a popular form of entertainment for youth, and what they're doing is they're finding the Japanese titles and they're actually doing the captions for them. And so what happens is this individual who may have been sort of outside a particular community, as he became more and more knowledgeable and expert in doing subtitles for Japanese anime, he started to find that there was a group around that particular interest, and sort of he made a move from a peripheral place in that group to a more central place because of getting this expertise. And one of the arguments she's making is that the media and the technology around that sort of afforded that sort of movement from a more peripheral to a central place. And the last one is a term that Lev and Wenger coined back in 1991 in Communities of Practice, where they're saying that, again, learning is more than just being able to process symbols or being able to regurgitate information, but you're able to participate and become a member of a particular community. And that community is defined by their particular practice, what they do. And they studied, again, this is a more ethnographic treatment. They studied butchers, they studied AA groups, they studied tailors, very much sort of guild-based groups or interest groups, and looked at how members moved from the periphery into the center by becoming more knowledgeable, more viewed as experts within their community. And so we're using this sort of this is sort of the conceptual or theoretical underpinnings of how people are looking at games in virtual world. And going from sort of the projective identities and sort of what happens in world, what happens in the real world. This screen capture is actually where it's a reproduction, but I participated in a conference in Second Life at San Jose State University, and this is their amphitheater, and that's my poorly ornamented character, or avatar. But I had a conference experience at this amphitheater, and it's interesting that the group that I met there, actually we've continued our professional connections. Are actually giving a presentation in 2 weeks in San Diego. On one group is actually doing a qualitative study of participants in this world. Other of us just have tangential interest and have decided to work together and give an in-place presentation in San Diego in a couple of weeks. So, looking at how what happens in the world has an effect on your real-world experience. This is G.A.M.E.R actually, and if I thought we had time, I was going to play the video, but we don't have time, and I can link to this.
So it's on your site.
Oh, it's on my website. Yeah, and the reason I wanted to bring this to our attention is that I think within a 5-minute period, he touches on several topics that we are discussing in my class. So it was very, very powerful for the students to kind of see, number one, see Jim talk, but also see how he's bringing these threads together. And so if you have a chance, like I said, yes, on my blog, I linked to it. It's through Edutopia. And if we have some time on the back end, I'll come back to this. I just use it as a placeholder or as a buffer.